agradecer a todos a vossa presença, terem aceito o convite, a alegria de ter o Luca aqui connosco e agradeço imenso o vosso empenho e espero que nos ajudem nesta pastoral e na sua implantação. Dou a palavra ao Tiago.
Obrigado, Isabel.
Não te importa.
Não,
Diz o resto.
Eu digo o resto.
Eu ainda só foi a introdução. Tinha muito mais para dizer, mas é tudo na tua mão. Obrigada, muito boa tarde. Doutora Anabela, isto é que foi uma colaboração em acelerado. Era impossível ter isto aqui e está. Muito obrigada.
O Serviço Pastoral é feito de encontros. Eu um dia encontrei a Isabel e a Alice e elas pescaram. Há 3 anos encontramos o Luca em Roma e agora cá está ele. Portanto, foi bem pescado. O Luca Badetti tem um passado interessante ao nível do seu interesse. Ele estudou psicologia, fez também estudos acerca da deficiência, tem também um fellowship em psicanálise e tem-se debruçado muito sobre aquilo que é a vida das pessoas com deficiência, mas não numa perspectiva teórica apenas. Ele tem vivido com pessoas com deficiência e tem aprendido com elas e é um pouco dessa experiência que vamos ouvir aqui. O Luca falará, como disse a doutora Anabela, o Luca falará em inglês. Eu depois farei algum comentário, mas se alguém depois tiver dúvidas e não tiver compreendido alguma coisa, estamos aqui para ajudar. Perguntem e nós ajudamos. So, Luca, thank you very much for being here and to accepting our invitation. And now it's time for you to present this lovely book. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming here this evening. Obrigado. You know, when I was listening to Tiago, a lot of the language sounds so familiar to my native Italian. So it's good that I can understand even a foreign language as beautiful as Portuguese. So tonight I'm here to talk about I Believe in You. And first of all, just a little introduction of sort of what brings me here. So I was born in Rome, Italy, then I moved to Milan, and then I moved to the United States, where I did my studies in theology, clinical psychology, and a doctorate in disability studies. But I have to say that what I've learned in living in community with people with intellectual disabilities far exceeds what I learned through books, theory, and ideas. One evening I was sitting at a community event next to a lady who has Down syndrome, and her Jennifer. And she was sitting right next to me. It was a bit of a hard evening for me. I was experiencing some faith doubts. And I knew Jennifer as a very spiritual, cheerful, but very spiritual lady. So I turned towards her looking for a word of wisdom to help me in my quest. So I turned towards her and I said, you know, I believe in God, but, and I didn't even finish the sentence. And she looked at me from behind her glasses and she told me, I believe in you. I believe in you. Twice. She did not bring me to an abstract level. She invited me to get in touch with my own humanity. And dare I say, our own humanity is where we can also encounter the divine. So I believe in you comes from the words of Jennifer. And the names and other information I've changed in the book, but the stories are real, of course. And these words, I believe in you, set in motion a reflection within me. What does it mean to believe in ourselves and in the other? And the root of the word, to believe, actually means to trust. So when we believe, we don't just believe a set of ideas or ideologies, but it's an act of trust. And there I say, in living community with people with intellectual disabilities, I am learning. I don't just say I've learned, because it's always a journey. It's always good to be reminded of what's important. It's easy to forget. So I've learned, I'm learning a great deal about what it means to trust our humanity. I teach at Loyola University, Chicago, in the Institute of Pastoral Studies. And questions about God are always important, fascinating. But in some way, there are also questions about ourselves, if we're made in God's image. We live in a society in which we have often learned to put masks on. And when I think of masks, I think of a lady with a disability who I shared community with, whose name is Karen. When I say the word community, I mean a specific type of community that I've been living in and that I've been working in for the past 11 years or so. It's called L'Arche. It's a community in which people with and without intellectual disabilities live together. So they cook together, they pray together, they eat together, they go on outings. We live in community. I used to live in some of the homes, and now I work from outside. So one of the people in the community, Karen, often goes out wearing big lion masks, like big plastic lion masks. And when people see her outside wearing this mask, they're like, oh, that's interesting, that's a bit odd. But really, in some way, we start thinking, like, don't we all wear masks? Don't we all hide behind something? Maybe what we hide behind is not a plastic mask, but we can hide behind our roles, whether those are professional roles or family roles or other roles. We can hide behind our beliefs. We can hide behind what we think we are, what we identify with. How do we help someone like Karen take off her mask? Karen has a hard history living in an institution for people with disabilities. There is a very hard history with institutionalization in the United States with people with disabilities. And Karen has some hard memories from her past in the institution. She was not treated well. We wonder if her going around with a big lion mask is a defense mechanism. Maybe a fear of showing her face. What we try to tell her in community is that she's precious and that she's beautiful just as she is. She does not need to change to be loved. She's okay as she is. But it takes time. When people go through trauma, it can take years, it can take a lifetime to regain trust. It's a journey. So we patiently tell her, you are precious just as you are. And it's great to see that in the end she always takes the mask off. Even us, with our own masks, it is so important that we find a community, that we find relationships in which we are known for who we are, because these relationships can ground us and can free us to go in the world, not as enslaved by our roles, by our obsessions, by our thoughts, but with the groundedness in our preciousness and our beauty. To be who we are is not primarily about what we do. It's very easy, when people say, "Who are you?" And the answer might be, "Oh, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher." It's like what we do. But that's only secondary. I'm Luca, you're Tiago, that's the first thing. We are who we are. I think of Ted, a man with Down syndrome, who does not speak using words. I prefer to say that than nonverbal. And Ted, it can be hard to know what Ted wants because of his inability to speak using words. But there is something that we know Ted really likes, and that is coffee. I still remember one day he went around the house with 3 cups of coffee, 2 in his hands and 1 over here, and he wanted a 4th one. But when someone likes something, they want a lot of it, So he really liked the coffee. But Ted had an incredible ability to simply sit in the community living room. And a lot of things could be happening in the house, and he was just able to be in the space, to be present to himself, and to be present to others with his coffee cup. In a way, the coffee cup is like a ritual. The spiritual traditions tell us how important rituals are to bring us in touch to our center and with God. But Ted also pinpointed to the importance of leisure. There is a beautiful term in Italian, you might understand it. It's called il dolce far niente, which is the sweet doing nothing. That is a really important concept. The sweet doing nothing basically means you are present. You just are. And it's not, some people might say, well, and living Western society can be very work-oriented. And some people might say that leisure is a privilege for the few. It's like, oh, well, you have time to. Well, there was a philosopher, Joseph Piper, who wrote a book during the reconstruction of World War II. It was called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Now, the reconstruction of World War II, Germany, was not a privileged time. But what he said is that we need, in order to reconstruct, we need to know what to build for. And if we build our societies just around productivity, just around doing, just around work, people who are not as productive as others are easily pushed to the margins. If we only emphasize what we do, people that don't do a lot are pushed aside culturally. Learning to be with ourselves can also bring us in touch with a little inner voice. And when I think about voice, I think of Jennifer, again, who has Down syndrome, and is usually a very cheerful woman, but sometimes has thoughts or hears voices, we're not sure, who say bad things to her. These voices are very distressing to her. Sometimes she screams, sometimes she cries. She cannot get a hold of these voices. Why are they saying these things to me? Sometimes the crying and the screaming gets so loud that people in the house sometimes have to change room because it's so intense. But after some time, Jennifer goes to the dining room table, takes out her coloring material, and draws and colors beautiful art pieces. Peace signs, suns, stars, coffee cups. She finds her way of getting in touch with a place of solace, of serenity. Henry Nouwen was a chaplain in the large community in Canada. And he said that within ourselves, we have the voice of the first love. What does he mean? He says that no matter what happened in our lives, whether we experience joy, pain, whether our pasts were easy or difficult, no matter who came in our lives, and no matter who left our lives, the love of God is there at the ground no matter what. It is unconditional and it is always present. It is a soft inner voice that loves us unconditionally and that can give us peace in the midst of our voices, in the midst of our screamings, and even in the midst of our tears. One time, living in community with people with disabilities is a wonderful thing. It has taught me a great deal about growing in humanity. But community is also very hard. If you have a family, if you are whatever community you have, you might know that living with people is not easy. And yet we live in a network of interdependence. Everything we do, we depend on. A lot of what we do, we depend on others for. I mean, even just here tonight. I'm here speaking. I'm depending on the transport system to have brought me here. I'm depending on the friendly stuff from the bookstore to open it here. I'm depending on stuff for the water. It seems that I'm giving this talk, but this is really a community event. It's not just me here. And what is community? What is the difference between a group and a community? Well, one time I was on vacation, and I returned to the community home after that vacation, and I was welcomed back by a friend who has Down syndrome. And the moment he saw me, Albert, he embraced me and he said, "Did you miss me?" Did I miss him while I was gone? It's easier to tell to someone, "I have missed you." It's a bit harder to ask, "Did you miss me?" Because you make yourself vulnerable. And the answer might make us happy or might hurt us, depending on how it goes. But he showed me something important about community. Is that we need one another. And if someone is not there, they're that important that we miss them if they're absent. Jewish philosopher Martin Buber speaks about I and thou relationships. He says that often when we encounter people, we might meet them and try to squeeze them in our minds. oh, this person believes in those things, they act that way, and they do those things. We try to limit our understanding of people in our own little universe. He says that that's meeting people as objects. He calls it I and it relationship, meeting the others as something we can grasp. But meeting others is about opening to the mystery that the other person is. I can know some things about you, but there is so much that I cannot comprehend. That does not fit my system. So in community, we want to meet others as they are, with appreciation of their mystery. It takes time to know people. It's a journey. To trust others, to believe in others, is a journey that might require forgiveness. Sometimes people have hurt us. So celebrating others is not just going around, oh, you're so nice, you're so nice. It can take time. But you know, the unconditional welcome that Albert showed is something that is profoundly human and humane. So I'd like to close this short presentation with the question, who is missing in our communities? This book is grounded in stories with people with intellectual disabilities. And throughout history, people with disabilities have been excluded from everything. Everything. Often culturally, they've been almost non-existent. Okay? But in our own lives, who are the people at the margins? Who are the people that we are missing? And who are the people that we can go out and celebrate? Because when we come together, whether we have disabilities or we don't have disabilities, whatever our background is, and we reveal to each other that we are precious, that we're beautiful in each other's eyes, then not only are we growing in our humanity, but we're also transforming our society, making it more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. O que é que eu digo agora? Eu sou um filho desta casa e aquilo que o Luca dizia acerca da questão de pensar a deficiência numa perspectiva teórica que não responde. Eu também comecei nesta casa, na Faculdade de Teologia, a refletir sobre a questão da deficiência, no meu caso sobre a questão da sexualidade da pessoa com deficiência. E também, na altura, estava numa perspectiva muito teórica. E foi aí que conheci muitas pessoas, muitas famílias que tinham estas questões. E então foi a oportunidade que eu tive de vir deste mundo da academia, do saber, da reflexão teórica sobre a vida de pessoas para um diálogo real. E apesar do Luca dizer que que pega nas histórias, ele consegue integrar neste livro diferentes conhecimentos, diferentes tradições, até tradições religiosas diferentes, perspectivas filosóficas, tudo intrinsado como se fosse uma bela manta de retalhos para poder trazer este livro. E de facto isto é uma manta de retalhos tão bonita. Eu gosto muito da capa. A capa tem pessoas felizes, umas mais sorridentes, outras menos sorridentes, mas que nos ajudam a entrar neste livro com o coração aberto. E entra-se neste livro começando a refletir sobre acreditar em nós próprios. Mas o que é isto de acreditar? É conhecer primeiro, é aceitar as nossas capacidades, mas também as nossas fragilidades, reconhecer que existe riqueza nessas fragilidades, que temos muito a aprender, mas que também temos muito para dar. E de facto é nesse sentido que depois, se isto entra numa ponte, isto faz uma ponte entre, depois de eu acreditar em mim, ou acreditando em mim, eu abro portas para acreditar no outro. Seja ele o outro que está ao meu lado, mas também o outro, o último outro, Deus, a última natureza, aquilo que lhe queiramos chamar, uma última realidade. Então, quando em todos os capítulos, subcapítulos, o Luca traz uma personagem. Portanto, eu gostava de agradecer à Jennifer, à Karen, ao Ted, ao Albert e todos os outros nomes que ele encontrou e com quem viveu, para puderam provocar esta reflexão, puderam dar-nos este lindo contributo. E de facto, se uma pessoa utilizava máscaras, todos nós utilizamos essas máscaras, e às vezes é difícil tirá-las e aceitar-nos como nós somos. É difícil às vezes viver em comunidade, mas também é alegre. São estes sorrisos, são sorrisos de quem vive em comunidade, uma verdadeira comunidade. E quando toda a sociedade nos diz que nós valemos pelo que produzimos, pelo que fazemos, pelo quão autónomos somos, pelo que valemos, isto dá-nos outra mensagem. É que nós é um paradigma diferente. Nós somos bastante só pelo facto de sermos. E à medida que vamos lendo o que está aqui, é maravilhoso encontrar essas histórias. Todos nós também ouvimos as vozes que às vezes nos dizem: não vales nada. Para que é que fazes isto? Não vales nada. Mas às vezes é preciso ouvir esta voz que vem cá dentro, que no silêncio nós às vezes conseguimos encontrar e que nos dá a certeza de que existe algo mais. Então, desta passagem do acreditar em mim para o acreditar no outro, do encontrar o outro, de estar com o outro, esta foi a vida que o Luca tem escolhido. E tem acompanhado várias comunidades da Arca, e eu digo sinceramente que ele é um bom discípulo de Jean Vanier. Eu tenho que traduzir isto. I believe that you are a true disciple of Jean Vanier. É uma grande responsabilidade, mas
I love John, but he's not God.
Então, eu não diria mais. Acho que nós gostávamos muito que este livro fosse traduzido em português. Ele é recente, ele foi publicado há muito pouco tempo. Portanto, temos um desejo saudável de que ele possa vir a ser traduzido para que mais pessoas possam conhecer estas histórias, para que possam chegar a um lugar mais profundo e podermos reconhecer uma coisa importante: é que mais de 10% da população vive com algum tipo de deficiência e que muitas vezes dizem: mas nós não os vemos. Mas onde estão? Existem. Estão nas nossas famílias, nas vossas famílias, nas vossas comunidades. E a outra coisa que é fascinante aqui é que nesta audiência encontramos pessoas que têm o seu percurso académico e têm o seu dia é centrado na investigação, no ensino, mas temos aqui na audiência pessoas que vivem com pessoas com deficiência, têm os seus familiares que têm tanto a dizer. Então, afinal, a deficiência tem esta característica, ou as pessoas com deficiência têm esta característica, conseguem também unir-nos. E eu acho que isto é muito importante para a academia, pensar nisto, que é nós temos aqui um encontro das pessoas com deficiência e os seus familiares, mas também o grande grupo de saberes, da teologia, das ciências sociais, do direito, da saúde, tudo vem cá ter. E portanto acho que este é um excelente encontro. Eu estou muito feliz que o Luca tenha aceitado vir cá e partilhar connosco um bocadinho da sua história. Portanto, mais uma vez, thank you very much, Luca. o espaço para algumas questões. Acho que será uma boa oportunidade para ter algum diálogo e para poder interpelar o Luca. Portanto, podem fazer as perguntas em português, se se sentirem confortáveis. Se quiserem fazer em inglês, também podem fazer. É como quiserem. Acho que a Alice estava aqui a... Força, Alice!
A minha experiência, you can understand.
Yes.
A minha experiência como mãe de uma pessoa com uma deficiência muito profunda, também sem expressão verbal na vida, foi muito centrada nesta questão do I believe in you. Foi algo que quando o choque do confronto com a deficiência caiu em mim, o que me ajudou foi saber que eu podia acreditar que o meu filho era um caminho que tínhamos que fazer juntos, tínhamos que descobrir, mas que partia do I believe in you, porque ele era um dom de Deus e Deus estava lá, portanto não podia ser um caminho de infelicidade, era um caminho de felicidade, fosse onde fosse que ele pudesse chegar. O chegar não era essencial. O essencial era o acreditar que o caminho era possível e era bom.
Posso traduzir? Alice, só para... Did you understand or do you want me to translate?
Yeah, no, I think I'm understanding.
Ok, good. Boa.
A questão da produtividade e do tempo livre, do dolce far niente, tenho uma história muito, muito interessante que penso poder partilhar. A certa altura houve uma terapeuta que foi tomar conta do grupo do CAU, onde o meu filho estava, Centro de Atividades Ocupacionais.
Okay.
E ficou muito perturbada. Eu não posso fazer um programa para o Dido. Ele não faz nada. E o lugar dele não é aqui. Ele tem que ir para outro sítio. E eu disse, o lugar dele é aqui porque nós criámos a Cércia para ele. Portanto, não há dúvida, o lugar dele é aqui. O desafio de saber o que exigir dele, todos nós temos que ter exigências. Mas essas exigências têm que ser realizáveis. E num caso como o meu filho, era difícil de saber. Era preciso ler sinais e depois construir sobre eles. Eu disse-lhe só isto, ela ficou sem respirar, e eu disse, mas não se preocupe, ele mostra. E passados 3 meses, penso eu, fim do período, ela convocou para uma reunião de avaliação. E ao contrário do primeiro dia em que ela estava muito zangada, ela estava com um sorriso enorme. E disse, nós descobrimos o que é que o Dido podia fazer aqui. Enquanto o grupo estava a fazer uma coisa de ensacamento de amendoins, penso eu que era.
It's an activity.
Sim.
It was
Okay.
putting
Peanuts.
peanuts in a bag.
Oh, okay.
In bags.
In a bag.
So,
All people were working and Dido would not. Mas ele inventou um jogo, olhando fixamente para olhava e o Tiago dizia, olá Dido, ele sorria e passava para si, e depois passava para a Carmo, e depois passava para os outros, e às tantas, toda a gente gostava de estar no grupo, porque o Dido, ela chamou a alegria no trabalho. O papel dele, que não fazia nada, estava, like you said, ele só estava, mas estava ativamente mostrando que eles eram precious, como diz o João.
obrigado, Alice. Did you understand?
Yes, and so in the center, he
Yeah.
basically led the way for the activity, right?
No, they were doing an activity, like
Yes.
a productive
Yes.
activity, and he was just there, and he would just then look to another person, and they had to answer hello, and then he moved to the other, and he would stare at the person, and he would do hello. So it meant all the people would be joyful there,
Yes.
because he brought joy to the working,
Yes.
joy in the work.
Yes, yes,
So
yes. You know, it's interesting because even within the disability world, there are subcultures. In other words, people with disabilities. See, that's always a tricky term when people say, how is he living with people with disabilities? Who? I mean, there are many people with disabilities, and each person with disability is different. But people with profound disabilities are often some of the most marginalized. People don't know how to interact or talk or discover what they need. So I really see in your eyes, you know, when you speak about the journey with him together. Him? It's a son, yeah. The look of preciousness that you valued your son. Often in disability world we speak about person-centered care. Oftentimes in the past, sometimes to this day, there were services for people with disabilities, one size fit all. In other words, well, everyone should fit into this project or program, but it's not like that because each person is different. And it's wonderful to see how personable and loving your eyes were in speaking to your son and in this experience. Yeah. I remember someone who once told me, who worked with someone with a profound disability. And she said, you know, even if he doesn't answer, I still ask him questions. I leave the space. And how important is that? That someone feels that even if they cannot express things a certain way, that there is someone who cares enough about them to make space for them. And that's really important. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Do you know that we spoke about it earlier on, about sometimes the perspective is to do things for
Yes.
the person with disability.
Yes.
And the other way is that we do it with the person with disabilities. Would you like to share your experience and your perspective on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Michel Foucault, he was very critical of power structures. And using his method of analysis, one can think of who does the inclusion? Who is the expert in inclusion? And oftentimes, it is people without intellectual disabilities telling people with disabilities how they should be included. The question is, how do people with disabilities themselves want to be included? What is important for them based on their own experience, which is different than other experiences? So sometimes the danger of doing for is sort of imposing our way onto people with disabilities. Now, of course, help can be a wonderful thing, of course. It can be motivated by wonderful sentiments and a great will. So it's not that help is bad. But hopefully it grows into a mutuality. in which, all right, you need help, but I need help too. So how are we going to journey together in this? Sometimes, you know, even in theology, etc., the term the poor is a tricky one. Because if we do good to the poor, it's us doing something for them. But if by poverty we mean a need, we all have needs. We might have different needs, but we all have needs. So once we get to that shared human level, I think the helping becomes more of a mutuality, and there is a mutual transformation.
First person.
Se puder, numa área mais específica, se Luca pudesse partilhar bocadinho a sua experiência, como ajudá-los, como ajudar as pessoas no encontro com a sua dimensão espiritual. Se nos pode partilhar,
Yes.
sim?
So in my experience, I have people with disabilities.
No, in your experience,
Yes.
the way, how can we help the person with intellectual disabilities or with disabilities to encounter with herself in a spiritual way, or to develop the spirituality dimension?
Sim.
Yeah. You know, I go back to, it's a bit hard to give a general answer just because I don't know who the individual is, right? But there is something that in living in community, so Lars is it's a faith community. It started in the Catholic tradition, but it is now interfaith and interreligious. So in my community in Chicago, I mean, I've been part of different communities, but my current one, we have people with from different faith backgrounds. Christian, we had a Muslim board member, some people Jewish, and people who might not identify with a religious affiliation. I think one of the question is the willingness to be led. To be led. We might often come with certain preconceptions about spirituality, and if we when we speak about space for people with disabilities to express what spirituality means to them and what gives them life, then we listen to that and we can learn to support that. But it's paying attention and staying in tune with what gives them life, and where they find a sense of peace and solace, and to make space for that and to nurture that. So I think it's a very gentle listening to it. It's not just a program that we go and do, And you know, there is a theologian, Nancy Iceland, who was a Protestant theologian, and she spoke of Jesus as the disabled God. And there is a whole interesting, even in theology, an interesting questions as to, you know, the wounded Jesus, even in the resurrection, showing himself with the wounds. There is a lot that disability can also teach us about God.
Primeiro, muito obrigado pelas reflexões que fez e que foram, pelo menos para mim, muito valiosas. Obrigado. Uma experiência pessoal. Eu tenho um filho que nasceu com paralisia cerebral. Cedo os pais se aperceberam que precisavam de criar relações. Em princípio, o que se procurou foi relações com outros pais com deficiências semelhantes, em que se pudessem entreajudar. Mas isso não chegava. E foi-se alargando até que se criaram comunidades estruturadas para estas crianças e para se desenvolverem. Mas se isto, a comunidade é realmente muito importante, contém também dois riscos há vários riscos, mas dois que são muito importantes. O primeiro é ser uma comunidade fechada e a não se inserir no resto da sociedade. O segundo, que é tão importante como este, ou talvez maior, é se essas comunidades terem uma estrutura tão rígida, digamos militar, em que a vontade de cada um seja aniquilada. E como em tudo e no médio virtus, como é que se faz o equilíbrio entre a inserção na sociedade e a institucionalização, digamos, a comunidade, para evitar os riscos e ter só as mais-valias.
So the danger of community can be that it can be too close in itself and not integrated enough, and too militaristic and rigid.
And how can we find a balance between the inclusion and the existence of the community? So
The inclusion and the existence of the community.
yeah, and the inclusion of the community, the inclusion in the society, and having a space for the person with rules and a way of living. So.
Yeah. You know, there is a fine line. I mean, no, a community is not a cult. And what is the difference between a cult and a community? It's the degree of freedom. There can be a danger if people are always together, just amongst themselves, and not really integrated in the wider society. And at the same time, you know, there is a term, it's called in English, I don't know in Portuguese, elective communities. In other words, people who share a culture, like a disability culture, and an experience, who might want to hang out with other people with disabilities because they share the experience. So to just impose that they should, you know, interact with everybody might again be is a push, you know. So the relationship between being together in a safe or close-knit community versus integration in the wider society, it's a constant balance that needs to be found, and I'm not sure there is one answer. But already the ability to ask that question is of primary importance, because it already means that we are thinking along those lines. For some people, that's not necessarily a concern. They might take for granted that, oh yeah, people with disabilities live in an institution and that's okay, or the other way. But if we can ask that precise question, how can we balance being a close-knit community and full integration? Then I think we're already on the path of finding that balance. Being in, Rilke said, you know, like, if we're in touch with our questions, one day we might also walk into the answers. So I think if we stay in touch with that questions, we might be living the answer along the line.
I have one question about
Yes.
questions.
Yes.
Because
And then I have a question.
yeah, okay. So university and the search for knowledge, it's about questions. So you are a doctor in the studies of disability.
Mm-hmm.
So the group that you had were just focused on spirituality, or did you have people from different sciences on that group? And
Yeah.
the second question is, how do you feel that it's important for the university, for the academy, to bring all the knowledges together for focusing on the reality or the phenomenon of disability?
Yes. So disability studies is a discipline that is relatively recent. It began in England, and it is closely tied to the disability rights movement. Okay? So by its conception, disability studies is not just an intellectual inquiry, but it also asks for social action. It's a constant conversation. The disability rights movement has been one of the great progresses that has been made in recent years. People with disabilities coming out and advocating for their needs and for their rights. And so disability studies is an interdisciplinary study that seeks to ask, what is disability? Who says who is disabled? Is disability present in the individual, or is it is socially constructed? What do I mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm on a wheelchair and I want to enter a building and there are stairs but there is no ramp. I am disabled from entering. If the ramp was there, I will be able to move around. So where is the disability? In my body or in the structure that prevents access, that disables me? So disability studies sort of brings into question disability a bit. The discipline, you know, there is people from all kinds of backgrounds. I brought in some, theology background. Some people in the discipline might be a bit skeptical about the theology and church, etc. They're concerned with, oppression or, etc. But I think now it's becoming more diverse, and there are more empowering theologies of disabilities. And
you mentioned that you had there were people from health backgrounds there,
yes,
from law, from economics.
Yes.
So people from different backgrounds,
yes,
can join this.
Can join, and the intellectual pursuit. I think when I say that people with disabilities can teach us to live from the heart and not just from our thoughts. I'm not saying that the intellectual life is bad. It's important to think through things, theories, to analyze things, but what is the end? What is the end of culture? Hopefully it is to include, to help make society more human. So it's fine to think this through and talk about theories, but in the end, how is this going to help us to create a more humane society where we can live from the heart?
Temos aqui duas questões. A Cristina tinha pedido aqui, depois ali ao fundo.
I was wondering if in your university, this discipline and this group, what kind of impact did it have in other disciplines, in people, and what's the role of the university on reflecting and producing outputs that can bring people with disability together with us?
Mm-hmm. And when you say this group, you mean?
I don't know exactly. Where are you working? The group of people?
With Lars?
Yes. No,
No.
university.
The university.
Okay.
University.
Yes.
What's the role of the university
Yes.
on reflecting, but on bringing this knowledge together? How can it also be widespread, implemented,
Yes.
not in educational system, but in our daily life by bringing people with disability together with us? Or
Yes.
how can we learn? But what's the role of the university in this?
Yes.
How did it started, if you know?
Yes.
How was the launch of this?
See, like with disability studies, the interesting thing is that the political movement came before the discipline. So it has always stayed in touch with that social action route. In my experience in the department where I studied it in Chicago, people brought in different areas of expertise, and then they brought disability studies back to their discipline. So, for example, if someone had a background in theater, then they started maybe bringing it into disability theater. If someone had a background in psychology or theology, they brought the discussion of disability back to those disciplines. I have a master's in clinical psychology, and one of the things that upset me about psychology is that often disability is spoken about in negative terms, as if disability is bad and sad. And it's like, no, in my experience, I mean, I've had great experience with people with disabilities. So I went to study disability studies, and I started bringing together those disciplines and letting them inform each other. In various events and research, of course, people with disabilities are included. Some are students, but some are the center of the projects that are created, because they're created for them. So, for example, with on the advisory board, we have a presence of a person with disabilities. In the way we research, for different agencies, keeping in mind what are the needs of people with disabilities. So always staying in touch with the voice from the ground, because otherwise the academia can become an ivory tower that is detached. That's always the danger. One of the things that I like the most about our yearly, what happens every year, so in Chicago there is a disability pride parade. That means that people with disabilities who have been oppressed throughout history march and say, I am proud to be who I am. I am not ashamed to say that I'm disabled, and I celebrate myself. And we march around downtown, and we have different disability organizations and disability agencies that enter into this group, which I think brings back to me that the academia has to come down and be close to people on the ground and celebrate life with them, because that's where everything really starts,
I try to speak in English. So I have a son.
Yes.
His name is André. He's got a cerebral palsy.
Okay.
Das cerebellum. We have him since he has 8 years because we adopted him.
Yes.
And he was considered to be institutionalized, but we insist, and we finally we succeed in adopting in the adoption. And I would like to share I think that love and the family is very important to reveal the potential and the richness that a person has. André, when he arrived, he always used a wheelchair. He didn't walk. He almost didn't speak. And in our family, with his brothers and cousins and the family, friends, he doesn't give up. He's trying always to be better. Now he can walk, support his right hand, or small spaces he can even walk alone. He is trying to say some small words and some sounds. He understands a lot. He loves the family, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, the uncles, everybody, the neighbors, everything. So I think that the importance of love and of the family is the thing that can help to reveal what the person has. And even when we sometimes when we go for holidays, we are, for instance, in the beach. All the families that are around us would cooperate with us because André is nice, he smiles and he tries to communicate, and all the people that is around us would cooperate and try to talk and to be together, and we have found lots of friends because of André. So it's in the neighbors, all the people. We are in the supermarket and they would try to communicate with everybody. So then we have to start speaking with everybody. So I think André is precious for us, and also for the brothers. I have more children, so and also for the family. So it's very important the person to feel that is left to become better and to shine.
Obrigado. He's building community around him. But I don't think I need to add anything. You said, and thank you for sharing.
Então, primeiro temos a Dona Maria João. Faz favor de dizer.
I have been in the Arch in Trolley in 83 for 2 months in the house where Jean Vallier lived. And then I was in the first community. Jean Vallier was not there, that's the Arch, where he was with the 3 first ones. No? And we and some persons of Portugal, we tried to get the spirit of Arch, because at the moment it was something very, for us, perhaps not for all the people, that we didn't find in Portugal. And I had a brother, which was a person with this intellectual disability. And when my mother died in 81, I had to begin to think about that, because I never had necessity of thinking it, but because my mother did everything. And I think my mother did everything. She made the conditions so that he could go into the world. He lived in a small place, and when she died, he had to come to Lisbon, a big town, where my brothers and sisters were. So, I think in a month he knew all Lisbon, more than I. And he didn't know, I think, he didn't know how to read, and I think, because he came home every day saying what was in the newspaper. And I was always asking me, but how somebody tells him what is in the newspaper? And he was very political against the society that was against him. He came with things that, because Hitler had killed children with disabilities. And all these things made me to do something after being in Arch. I think I had the spirit of Arch in me. It was, and in the persons that went there with me, not only me. And now, after 25 years, we have a community in a little bit in the sense of Arch, Casa de Betânia, Bethany House. And we have as model Mary and Martha and Lazarus. I learned this with Giovanni. He said, sometimes we had a small meeting with him about the gospel, and he told that he thought that Lazarus had some disability. And I always was thinking about that, and that's why we gave the name House of Bethany. And I think that this family of Arsh brought life to Lazarus because they had trust in him and that Jesus could do something. So I think that as it was this love or trust and family, it's very important. But I have a very big problem. They are 22 in 3 houses, 3 homes, and most of them have no family. They died. Brothers and sisters, they don't want to do nothing. Sometimes there are no relations. I ever go and a sister lives in the same place and she doesn't come. There are a lot different things. In the beginning, sometimes they are very interested. Then they leave. And I think that the most important thing for a person with disability is the family. You can give him a very good gift, present, and it's very good. He would like very much that we give. But then when comes a person of the family gives a chocolate. The chocolate is so important, so important. And I think this is very good. But you live with nearly all of them without a family, without relations with family. We try to say, but now we are a family. That's true, but and we try to be, but they live this difficulty because some were abandoned, some were taken out to the family because some problems, social problems. And to grow, I think it's very important to grow as a community with the persons with and without disabilities. But I think too that I never find a recept that is for all. Each one is different. And now this is real, but in some months it doesn't work. So I think these persons have many things to give to us and to make us to be always in search, as we are in search of God. I think they are God for us. I believe in you, God, or I believe in you, person. And it's a difficult way, but I think it's a way that gives us, we need force, we need help to go to them, because we never know if this is the best or the difficult. And since 25 years is already something, but what I knew in the beginning, it was one thing, and now I think another. And it's very easy to say, you told. Sometimes inclusion is one thing. I lived inclusion in Arsh. But now in Lisbon, we live in the surroundings of Lisbon, Caixas, that is Oeiras, more. But they come to work in different places in Lisbon. They know how to go in the bus, in the metro, and all these things. But the way is never done. There are problems sometimes in the way, and you have to see how to resolve them. I think the inclusion has always very much difficulties because the people are not so good. The persons they found in the bus, in the metro, in the work, because sometimes they work as they were persons that function with the cabeça, como se diz? With mind, but they don't functionate like that. So we never know. It's there we find our disability too, our fragility,
So,
And you know, so just hanging in this, it really brings to mind something about disability, also about social attitudes, that often, because the perception of disability is often negative, the attitudes, the social attitudes have been negative. One of the interesting things about disability, though, is that it's one of the most flexible identities. Each one of us, sooner or later, might have a disability. Some people are born with it, intellectual disability, whatever. But as we age, each one of us can become disabled. So disability discourse is not just about a selected few little group. So this is why it's also important in policy things to talk about it. It's really about all of us, because all of us might become disabled at one point or the other. So the disabled is not just the other, it's also about us. Yeah.
That's a very good point. So, esta é uma conversa muito animada. Teríamos como última pergunta, a que já tinha sido pedida, força.
Just to thank you for your so nice presentation and sharing your experience. And as you referred to Harry Nowen, just to remember to those who may be interested that his experience in Daybreak is translated into Portuguese. Paulina's edition have all his books, and that particular one I think is still available. So estava a sugerir que quem tenha interesse, como foi referido, o Harry Nowen, que tem a obra dele traduzida em português e a experiência dele na Arca não, na comunidade Daybreak no Canadá, e é um livro muito impactante e muito útil para quem queira refletir e saber um bocadinho mais sobre este tipo de comunidades e de experiências. Está disponível, penso eu aí, não tem nada a ver com os Paulinas, como leitor. Era essa experiência que queria também aqui partilhar.
Está ali, a doutora Anabela está a mostrar. Obrigado pela sugestão. No mesmo sentido, já há alguns livros de Jean Vanier traduzidos para a língua portuguesa. Um que saiu muito recentemente, editado pela Princípia, que é o Verdadeiramente Humanos, que é também uma experiência, é uma leitura impactante. Afinal, o que é isto de sermos humanos? Isso traz-nos de volta à terra, à tal humildade, e o Luca fala disto aqui. Humildade, a palavra que vem do humus, de reconhecermos quem somos, portanto, isso é muito importante. Eu estou muito feliz com o dia de hoje e pela oportunidade. Are you happy?
Me too.
Então, eu gostava de terminar com uma coisa. A Jennifer disse apenas 2 vezes ao Luca, I believe in you. Mas agora somos nós a dizer o quê? I believe in you. Obrigado.